In this video, we'll be talking about reproduction and the different types of reproduction that are found in the animal kingdom, and just a few extra little things that are thrown in here because they're about reproduction. And so, first off, we'll talk about asexual reproduction, which, as we stated in an early video, asexual reproduction is simply the just production of a clone, or you could say reproduction without gametes is another way you could kind of talk about this. So there are a couple kinds of asexual reproduction. Here is binary fission and amoeba, but amoeba aren't animals, and so we're not that concerned about amoeba. But that's just an example. You have one, it splits into two, and they're the same. We have our friend Bud here again, and budding is an example found in the animal kingdom. This is a picture of Hydra, which is in the jellyfish family, Nidarius, and so the Hydra will produce buds, and that bud is, even though it's independent from its parents, it is still genetically identical to him. Another type of asexual reproduction is called gemmulation. You see this with several species, particularly sponges, and gemmulation is the formation of a new individual, basically from an aggregate of cells. Think of a group of cells kind of breaking off and being surrounded by a capsule or a gemmule, and that gemmule can withstand pretty harsh conditions, and it will go off and it will plant a new species. It makes it sound like a plant, but it's not a plant. It's an animal, but it's not that complex of an animal, so it reproduces in this simple kind of way. But this does allow something that can sometimes withstand really harsh conditions to be able to reproduce pretty quickly. And another type of asexual reproduction is called fragmentation. This is what it looks like. So you start with an animal there on the left. That's a flatworm, and for some reason they cut that animal's worm, or cut that worm's head off and tail off, and it grows into more worm. So this part of the body grows into more head and more tail, and the head grows in more body, and the tail grows the head and the body. So you end up with three worms. If you cut a worm into three pieces, it doesn't die, it multiplies. Now, obviously, this process requires energy, and so this worm would have to have a lot of available energy in order to do this. But theoretically, these worms could just kind of keep coming back and regenerating like Wolverine. And so sexual reproduction is the production of offspring from the formation of gametes. Gametes are male and female sex cells, or sperm and egg. In all animals, these are going to be the gametes. And basically what that represents is you get half DNA from the mom and half DNA from the dad, or the male and the female. And they combine through the process called fertilization, and they produce a zygote, which is essentially a genetically unique organism that is different than both mom and dad and any siblings that may also exist. One type of reproduction is called hermaphroditism. There's a word for this too. Hermaphroditism is essentially when an individual like this worm here, you can look at either one of these worms, they have both sex organs. Sometimes you'll see the word meiosis used with this as well, Monoecious, meiosis. And this is basically when one organism has both sex organs, and so they are able to reproduce with any other individual. Like one earthworm can find any other earthworm, and they're able to reproduce. This is different than dioecious, which is where there is two different sexes, like most of the animal kingdom. There are also organisms called sequential hermaphrodites, where they can change sex later in life. Another variation of this is something called parthenogenesis. It comes from, it's basically, the root word there is virgin birth. And so this is the idea that an organism develops without the process of fertilization. And you see this with bees. So a queen is eggs are fertilized and makes female offspring that are diploid, but the queen's unfertilized eggs can also grow into male offspring that are essentially haploid offspring. They have half the complement of DNA. And so that's called parthenogenesis, where an unfertilized egg can grow into an actual organism. Life finds a way. All right, so a couple types of well, first of all, before we talk about internal versus external fertilization, I think it's important to kind of talk about the benefits of asexual versus sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is fast, doesn't require a mate, and so that's a good thing. But it also, there's very little genetic variation, and so if something happens to affect a particular set of a population, there's no chance for adaptation because there is no genetic variation. So really the flip side of that is for sexual reproduction, lots of genetic variation, lots of chance for adaptation, but it does require, finding a mate, does require, and it's a slower process, usually more time investment involved in that, which is both a good and a bad thing. If it's talking about parental investment is a good thing in the, livelihood or likelihood of the offspring to survive, but it's a bad thing in the amount of energy investment that is necessary for that. Okay, so reproductive patterns, internal versus external fertilization. Internal fertilization is like mammals, birds, reptiles. It's where the egg is fertilized inside the body. External fertilization is where the eggs are laid and then by the female, and the male comes around and fertilizes those eggs outside the body. So like in the water for these here salmon. Some animals are egg-laying. Egg-laying animals are called oviparous, which literally means egg-bearing. And so this snake is an oviparous snake. It's laid some eggs. Now it is waiting patiently for its brood to hatch. Some animals are called ovoviviparous. So it's kind of a mix between both egg and life or living. So this animal has eggs, but the eggs hatch inside of it. So it gives live birth to I almost said insects. Some insects do this, but it gives birth to live organisms that just hatched out of eggs, if that makes sense. Some sharks do this. Some sharks lay eggs. Some sharks are viviparous, which is the next one. Viviparous is like mammals. It's a live birth. So the animal gives birth to a live other animal. And some animals are called multiparous, where they have more than one offspring, like this here dog, and others are called uniparous, where they only give birth to one offspring at most, and two on some occasions. This would be like elephants or like us.